So, welcome everybody to another episode of Software Architecture on Stream. This time around again live from Software Architecture Gathering with two of the speakers from Software Architecture Gathering, Kenny and Avraham. And we will be talking about the culture and the cultural influence on software architecture. But first of all, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself. So, Kenny, do you want to start and introduce yourself and say a few words about yourself, what you're doing and what your background is?
Yeah, so my background is actually, my education is in electrical engineering, and I rolled immediately into software engineering, got into software architecture, and I think very early on in my career, I got to read Eric Evans' book about domain-driven design, and that's now really my key thing that I do. I help companies get a domain-driven design approach to their software delivery. And my next goal is to get architectures to able to facilitate these collaborative sessions you need to have for domain-driven design, right? Which is important, and that goes about a lot of social things that we're going to talk about today.
Right. So, Avraham, do you want to introduce yourself and say a few words about you?
My name is Avraham. I work with a cybersecurity company in Tel Aviv called F.E.A.R, and I've been an architect for quite a few years now. And as my role as an architect, I've been observing that architecture is a lot about how people communicate and how people collaborate. So that's something that I'm always interested at when doing architecture of software, about the human side of things, about the people side of things. It's always fascinating to me. And culture is one of those topics that I recently started learning about and teaching about and talking about, and that's what brings me here today.
Great. So, what made you choose that title and that topic? Does culture impact software design? Why is it important to you? And what's the reason for doing a talk, or I should rather say discussion? That was rather a discussion at Software Architecture Gathering. What made you do that discussion there?
Go, Kenny. You want to go?
Oh yeah, no, I think we've just met at domain-driven design and both have a large, passion for culture. My wife has a social scientist background in culture. Avraham is, you have your own story. And we met up, we started talking, and we were thinking, well, we should do this online and at a conference and share these stories because we find them so important. Yeah, that's my view.
In one of the talks I gave about collaboration and how collaboration is very, very much dependent on language. So I mentioned collaboration and cooperation depend on language, and language depends on culture. Language never exists independently of culture. And that prompted or provoked Kenny and others to say, wow, that means that culture impacts the way we create software. And there was a sense that there might be something worth exploring further there. So it was after that talk that Kenny and I started diving into this and exploring it and investigating it further.
And I think it's quite interesting because we all know that organization has a huge impact on software development and software architecture ever since code-based law. And I think culture is sort of the next logical step. And actually, your abstract also for the discussion that you did at Software Architecture Gathering talks about how important communication and language is for software development, and I couldn't agree more. So I guess if we have a team where everyone has the same cultural background, comes from the same country, speaks the same native language, communication should be much easier, and it should be much easier to come up with great software and a great architecture. So should we aim for these kinds of teams where there's a common culture, common cultural background, a common native language? What do you think? Is that something we should aim for?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking that. We always need to strike a balance. On the one hand, teams that speak the same language, that speak the same culture, that share the same values, that have the same background, that have the same shared history, communicate very, very effectively, and they're able to design good software. The downside is that everybody in the team thinks the same things and they think the same way about things. And then it's hard to there's a lot of the echo chamber effect. and a lot of strengthening ideas. And it's when you bring people with other cultures, which typically bring in other ways of thinking and other way of looking at things, that the team is able to actually see things from another point of view. So what I would say is the ideal balance is to have a team that is somewhat homogeneous, where everybody thinks and talks and speaks the same culture, and seed it every so often with somebody from the outside. And as soon as that person from the outside has been assimilated and become native to the team, it's time to bring somebody else new in to seed a new way of thinking, and constantly have migration into the team, and of course migration out of the team. That's one. And two, the team should always be culturally aware and diverse aware. So even though we all think the same things and believe the same things because we all work together and like each other for so long, we should always seek out new ways of looking at things. And that'll be seeded by the new member that hopefully will be brought in, but other opportunities. So if a manager of a team or a leader of a team sees that the team is becoming too uniform and everybody is starting to say the same things and echo the same ideas, it's time to inject some catalyst into that team. It's time to bring some new diversity of thought in the team. But we need uniformity. You cannot develop software with a flash mob. You need people that have been together for some time, like a dance group or an army troop. People that trust each other and that work well together and that understand each other in a very, very effective way, that they could develop good software. So it's a difficult balance to strike, and it's an extremely rewarding balance to strike.
Yeah. Yeah, and to move on to that, and I like to define culture as well. And the easiest way I've learned is from two Dutch cultural anthropologists, and they say culture is, this is how we do it here. That defines me for culture. It's in the interaction, it's in the behaviors, it's in the in-between. And a good story that Avraham says, right? If you look at these two women from Jitske and Daniela from the Netherlands wrote this book about the corporate tribe. And they were looking at other cultures, but like tribal cultures, and see what did they do, what problems did they solve, and what problems do we now have in the corporate world, right? And these are actually the same, they found out. So, and to give you an idea, is what they said is culture always interacted. It's in the marketplace in these tribal cultures, right? They shared goods, they shared partners, they shared everything in this marketplace, which is needed. Because what you see, and this is a story in the Netherlands, to be concrete, is the Netherlands, I'm from the Netherlands, and tulips, we're well known for tulips, but tulips aren't coming from the Netherlands. I think they originated from Turkey. Now, but why do we grow them in the Netherlands? Is we drained the ocean in the Netherlands, and then ground came up, right? But this ground is not fertile to potatoes or to other things. You know what they were fertile for? Tulips. And this way, the diversity brought a multi-million billion economy to the Netherlands just by having these marketplaces. So it's what Avraham says, right? You want stability, but you need a marketplace to exchange some of these cultural goods with each other, right? Because too much diversity, as Avraham says, is too stressful. And I always call, we need someone who is the similar type, but just a type different. If you want to talk software architecture, right? We need to have a super class of the same thing, but just a different one. So we both need to be animals, but if we're maybe something else than an animal, that might not work that well. That's really hard to smash that together. Steps, baby steps.
So in a way, what you seem to be saying is that the diversity in the team should be limited, and there was an episode that actually said that about diversity, and one of the sort of hypotheses there was that that diversity makes teams more productive because there are many different approaches to problem solving. So is there any kind of contradiction here, or is it just that it seems like there are two opinions about diversity? Because what you seem to be saying is that the team should be in a way uniform, and then you should have some diversity but only limited. So
So for me, yeah, culture exists for a reason, and it's because nature is chaotic. Everything around us is, there is no is in the world. Nothing has meaning by its own. We create culture to bring that meaning in, right? Because we need it, else we cannot survive. But if we do that for a long time, it will turn into what Abraham called group thinking. It will stop evolving. So it's what I like to call a polarity between chaos and structure. They are both ends and they need to be managed. It's not, you cannot do chaos, which is we just have all types of diversity in a group, because that will turn into a lot of conflict, like it will crash. And we cannot have too much structure. It needs to be somewhere in the middle, and we need to constantly manage these as a how do you call it, lemniscat, right? You constantly need to see, okay, what is the bad side of being structured? We're not getting any new ideas. Okay, when you see that, maybe we need to get more diversity in. If it's too much chaos, maybe we need to stabilize the group now. And I'm not talking, diversity is broad, right? It's not just any types of gender or any types of color or any type of cultures in the world. It's also neurodiversity, right? I don't like to go into intro and extroverts because this is about too binary to me, but it's a skill. And if your team is too chaotic, you need to stabilize. But when it's too stable, you need to add diversity. And it's a constant skill that I believe people from outside the team should be able to manage. So that can be leadership roles for maybe architects, maybe management type of. So that's how I see it. Maybe Avraham sees it differently.
So no, I agree. I strongly agree. Diversity makes a team more productive. Diversity makes a team more creative. But there are other things that make a team more productive and creative. For instance, being able to understand each other, being able to effectively communicate with each other, having worked together a lot. So we have two things that make teams more productive, and these two things are at opposites with each other. And that's why we have to constantly, and it's not even a balance. The metaphor of oscillating is a good one. We sometimes go for the uniform team, and then we sometimes go for the diverse team, and that'll give us a nice balance of productivity and creativity.
Yeah, and one thing to add, because if you're doing diversity, you start to include, and this is the paradox. There's always paradox. Inclusion always creates exclusion. If I invite a certain type of people inside my team or my culture, I by default usually exclude other types of people. And that's just something we need to deal with. So it's just not that simple as we can include everyone. Just so you know, if I include A, I might exclude B. Am I fine with that, and what do I lose?
I think it's a very good point that at one point when you don't have such a common grounds to work on, then there is something wrong and you can't really have a team that performs at all. In your abstract, you gave an example of cultures, how they communicate differently. So some are very direct and say, okay, this is wrong, it needs to be fixed, and others are rather polite and say, well, have you considered this? And maybe I believe that there might be something wrong here, and are rather indirect. And I guess everyone has some story to that that could illustrate that. However, at the end of the day, I believe we are building software, and it's all about the code and the structure in the code. So we have some software architecture. So could you tell from the software architecture what culture the team has, and what needs to be fixed in the culture of the team, whether they are too polite even, or what? Because at the end of the day, we are talking about software, so somehow this influences, it has to influence what we are building, right?
So if you look at software that comes out of the military or out of a German company, you might see that everything looks the same, and that everything is highly templatized and highly structured and highly formalized, and everybody includes the same libraries and everybody uses the same practices, and naming conventions are preserved, and documentation follows very rigorous standards, even if it doesn't add clarity. There's a premium on formality. And I would look at a piece of software like that and say, yep, an architect from Germany probably did this piece of code, or an architect from Germany probably wrote this software, and that's why it is so structured and so rigorous and so formal. On the other hand, if I look at some code, maybe that came out of, let's say, an Israeli startup, and there are routines that don't follow naming conventions, but all kinds of creative ideas, and maybe I do pointers, or maybe all kinds of in-memory games, or all kinds of what might seem to an outsider as spaghetti code, but code that means that the developer is obviously deeply intimate with his own code and knows his code very well, and that he doesn't trust anybody else to change his code, and rightfully so, because this code is almost a reflection of his own thought process. You might look at this code and say, well, it works, and it works in a creative way. It's not easy maintainable. It was probably done by an Israeli software developer working for some small startup, and he was more eager to get out to market than he was eager to follow the process. So yes, you can tell from looking at the code, and from looking at the comments in the code, and from looking at the structure and the relationships between the objects, certain ideas about the culture. Just like people could look at poetry, translated poetry even, and say this was written by a German poet and this was written by an Arab poet. Poetry is poetry, but there's certain things, rhythm, music, structure, thought processes that come through that reflect itself down.
Yeah. And of course, these are all stereotypes in a way. So it's not every German or every Dutch or every Israeli are like this. But I think there's a general underlying thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Since you mentioned stereotypes, stereotypes are extremely useful. And at a first level, and the reason that they exist is that at a first level approximation, they are often true. When stereotypes become a problem is when we stick to our stereotypes and ignore other facts. But if you meet somebody and you don't know anything about him or her, a good place to start is the stereotypes. They will give you some clues and some indications of perhaps what to accept. A culturally open-minded person will be quick to drop the stereotypes when presented with evidence to the contrary. But it doesn't mean that stereotypes are useless. Stereotypes are a good thing. They help us get our first order approximation. For instance, we have culturally evolved, evolutionarily evolved, that people that look like us are probably friendly, people that look different than us are probably hostile. And that first level approximation has been very useful to human beings over many millennia of evolution. Fortunately, it's no longer true. And people that look like us can be quite hostile to us, and people that look different than us might be quite friendly to us. So we have to overcome that initial stereotyping. But our ancestors were very well served by that initial stereotype.
And taking that back in the software design, right? I grew up with software being already built, so I saw a lot of legacy code. But I got a negative connotation with that legacy code. For me, it was a negative stereotype, which I grew over nowadays because I couldn't handle with it back then, right? So for me, it was like legacy. I don't want to work there. But actually, legacy I find is good because it did its thing, right? So I need to dive deeper. So stereotypes are a good starting point, but it depends on the age again and the culture again. If you find legacy good or bad, or microservices good or bad, or going on.
Yeah, so I think it's actually quite interesting that you said that stereotypes are a good thing. I think it's important to realize that you have them in order to be aware of because they might turn into racism. And if you know that there are those stereotypes, you can think about them, reason about them, and also break them and say, okay, this is a person and this is the stereotype that I was taught and that often fits, but this time I will think about it and maybe that's different in this case. However, coming back to the, and Felix Müller just did a comment and said that he liked the expression military or German companies. But coming back to that difference between, and I can actually tell you that I've seen German code that is not as structured as you might think it should be. But coming back to that point, If you look at a startup and some military software, I mean, at the end of the day, if you have some problem in the military code, it might mean that people actually die. And if you have a startup, chances are that you lose some money, and you know, you have to. So that's a different type of risk, and also you have to move quickly to get into the marketplace. So is it really the structure or the culture of the development team, or is it more about how there are quality requirements and attributes for the software that influence this code in the first place? So is it really the culture, or is it just sort of the answer of the development team? And if you take that team that used to do military software and put it in a startup company, and you know, vice versa, maybe they would change their style after some time because they realize that the other way is the more successful way.
What an interesting question. Culture, among things, is defined by values, what we value. That's what, so when we work for our startup, our value is we want to use limited resources in order to make a lot of money, and we want to make it fast. That's our value. When we are working for a military organization, our value is we have infinite resources, or virtually infinite resources, especially compared to the private sector. The armies are very, very rich and have very large budgets. And we are here to save lives, and we are here to follow orders, and we are here to defend the country, or we are here to create something on a national scale. And the quick time to market is not one of our values. So you said that these are requirements, but they're more than requirements. They're the values that drive a company. If you listen to the mission statements of startup companies and the mission statements of military organizations, or military organizations, just an example, very, very large organizations. If you look at the mission statement of BMW, it probably is not be the first car to the market, or innovate on zero budget and beat the competition. It's probably something about reliability, stability, being the best in the league, being repeatable process, making every BMW car look like every other BMW car. I imagine, I haven't read the mission statements of these companies. So these are cultural things. These are not just requirements put on by the stakeholders. It's why the organizations exist. Why does military get into the business of creating software? Because they believe that through creating software, they will save lives. Why does a startup get into the business of creating software? Because they believe that through the process of creating software, they'll be able to gain fame and fortune, or whatever it is that the startup is going into. So these are part of the values, and values are part of our culture.
Yeah, and going into that, a key is also in system thinking, where you have these three levels, right? You have the parts, the interactions, so you have the purpose. Now, if you just switch the software, that's what we were saying, right? Which are actually the parts. Changing parts doesn't change the purpose. That's what Avraham was saying. So it's similar to a university. If I have a university, that's its purpose. If I switch out a teacher, then it doesn't change the purpose. The system isn't changing just by changing a teacher. It might slightly drift, but not a lot. The Donella H. Meadows Thinking in System books gives 9 pointers, I don't know off the top of my head, to pivot the system, right? But just changing the parts won't change the system itself. It will just, confirm, and you can see this in person yourself. You're coming in a company and you say, what is this microservices doing all in this one database, right? We know from another company, we shouldn't do this. I'm going to change that. And you find yourself a year later, unchanged, not able to do that, because you're being sucked into the system, the purpose, because there was a good reason for it. And that's how systems and culture usually works.
Mm-hmm. So I think one point that you made is very interesting to me. So what you're saying in a way is companies, large companies, have some kind of culture and probably some mission statement. Maybe it's not just maybe it's not really the mission statement, but rather the mission that they actually do follow, which is might be different from what they're saying, and that might be about stability and whatever it is. And the question that I really want to ask is, I find myself as a consultant often in a position where it's about changing, and making people using microservices, making them use agile processes, and all these kinds of things that would make the company move faster. And what you're saying in a way is that this will be very hard because there is that different culture around.
Yeah. It's just, yeah.
And so what's your advice? How should I deal with it?
Yeah. So there's this interesting book, and I think it's in English, by Daniela and Yitzko. It's The Corporate Tribe. They have this model, and one part that we keep forgetting, because we're thinking in change as a green field on the other side. We need to go to microservices. But the thing is, we need to look and watch what's going on now. What are the stories now? And in anthropology, cultural anthropology, call it emic and ethic. Emic is just go in, observe, don't judge, find out what's there without judgment. And from there, build a framework. You can find more on that in the corporate tribe. Right? Build a framework. What are the stories here? What are the behaviors? What is the culture? And then give that snapshot back and say, this is your culture, right? What do we feel about this culture? And then people say, yeah, that's our culture, and this is bad, and this is better. Okay, great. So then you can go to the change, right? Now we're accepting that some things of some behavior in our thing isn't bad, and we want to change that. So this purpose isn't helping us anymore. We need a different purpose. And then you're shaping the new system. So then you come in change, and things for change. First, you need to change the story. It's all about stories that we tell each other. Cultures are being passed on in stories. So you need to change the story of the company. If one story of your company is in the military, right? Trust, safety, and saving lives, and you want to change that, you need to change that story. You need to really, get that story in, and then you change the rituals concerning that, right? A ritual for a monolith might be all teams, maybe a release train, because we need to, at 3 months, get together and do that. No, maybe that don't work with microservices anymore because we have a different statement we want to be distributed. So what's the ritual you need to change there? The ritual is changing there is, okay, then we need to change the story of how our APIs work. They need to be independent of each other. So that's the ritual that needs to change, that maybe the flow needs to change, so, right? Different collaboration. And in team topology is a nice book, right? The team dynamics of changing the communication, changing the collaboration, changing the teams. That's where it sits, in my opinion. And then you start over again and checking that again. But cultural anthropology can give you a lot of pointers there, which helps me. I usually go in and assess what's here, what polarities do I see, what patterns do I see, what do I observe, and are these patterns okay or not? Because I'm not there to judge. But if there's no collaboration, then I won't do microservices. That's a judgment I would make.
I would just re-emphasize one point that Kenny made. It's very difficult to change culture. You could only make small adjustments to culture. People like their culture. People are in love with their culture. People believe in their culture. So even if our culture is bad, for a lack of a better word, or not fit for purpose, it's my culture. And people are conservative by their nature, and people will not easily experiment with their culture. So we can make fine adjustments and fine small tunings to the culture, and over time, hopefully make a difference. And even if you look at other cultures, like when do racist or chauvinist jokes stop? They stop over a long, long time when more and more people say, these jokes are not so funny anymore, and our culture should try to find a way to get rid of them. And we admonish each other and say, that joke is racist. It's really not. Our culture is striving to be something else. And then maybe over 50 years, you're able to, maybe 100 years, you're able to finally get a culture that looks disapprovingly upon racist or chauvinist or whatever jokes there are. But you can't just one day say racist jokes are bad. From now on, nobody ever make a racist joke again. It just doesn't work with all the good intentions.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for being here. It's already half an hour done, so time really flies. I think it was a very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
And I learned a lot, and in particular the last point about how culture slowly changes. I think that's quite, how should I put it? it means that I can probably set more realistic goals for the next client that wants to do all the fancy stuff. So thanks a lot, and
thank you.
Continue here at 7:05 with my colleague Lisa, and she will talk to Cosima Laube about D.A.R.E more fearless, how journaling puts leadership in action. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Kenny. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Live.
Hi there, this is the second interview this evening. My guest is Cosima Laube and we want to talk about journaling. Cosima, would you like to speak a few words about you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to be here. I'm Cosima Laube. I'm currently located at Lake of Constance. So yeah, I like nature, and when I'm not out in nature, I'm working as a team coach, as an organizational coach. I have a background in computer science and in psychology and professional coaching. And since a couple of years, I'm independent here and help people and teams to achieve more together to craft good software. Yeah.
One of these things to get more productive or to get more efficient with yourself is journaling. But how did you get into journaling?
How did I get there? So I think there are 2 points where I did get there. So the more conscious one is that a few years ago, I got a journal. So I call it a semi-structured journal. It was Clarity Journal, or in German Klarheit Journal, where there are some prompts already given. And a good friend of mine, Armin Schubert, who used to make talks with me on gratitude in business, got such an exemplar, to have a view onto that. And he had no use for that. And he said, would you like to try it out? I know you're into journaling, or you were into journaling. And I said, do I have the time to do that? Do I want to get in the habit again? And as it was a gift from a friend, then I said yes. And I really wanted to use it. I didn't want to try it, have a few pages and then dump it. So because it was really dear to my heart. And this was re-entering again into the journaling habit. And when I look back even more, I have a history of 20 years of, I call it kind of structured, regular writing. So journaling techniques have accompanied me throughout the whole professional life, including my studies. Yeah.
You talked about prompts within journaling. Can you give an example for such a prompt?
Yeah, so for example, if you have what I call semi-structured journals, these are not the blank books with just blank pages, but the Clarity Journal, which is one of those, or 6 Minutes Diary, which is pretty popular because there's some psychological background in it. So I really like it because of that. And it's also available in a couple of languages. There are half sentences. This is a prompt. For example, in the morning in the 6 Minute Journal, today I would like to make my day wonderful, ... And then you have 3 lines. So you think about what would make my day wonderful today. Or today I would like to be and then an empty line. Or in the evening, a prompt today I feel grateful for, and then there are 3 lines, for example. So this is a prompt for journaling,
And this is more like a self-reflection journal, I would call it. But what I'm using is a bullet journal to organize myself, to organize my to-dos. Do you also use a bullet journal yourself?
Yeah, I wouldn't say bullet journal because I have the book from writer Carol and I have read it, and I do not fully adhere to the bullet journaling method, but I think maybe it's with Agile, so you don't need to fully adhere. But I tried it. So after such a journal with prompts, with the semi-structured things, I figured that it doesn't give me so much, and I looked where to go next. And then I read some, half of the bullet journaling book and started out with that. So I have some sorts of that, like the index or the daily log, where you log your tasks and also what happened. And I have developed some sort of symbols for me, for example, as a small heart for stuff which I'm grateful for throughout the day. So that's also included then in my daily log. And to be honest, I really had a hurdle before I started with bullet journaling, because I saw, when I searched the internet, all those beautiful crafted bullet journals, and I really admired them. But I just don't have any patience for that when I'm at work or when I'm doing it daily. So sometimes I craft something with a nice pen, but usually just me can't read that, and that is okay. So it doesn't need to be beautiful.
I think this is one of the greatest tips to give everyone out there. It doesn't need to be master art piece, the bullet journal. It's just for you to organize yourself. I've learned this also because I looked for bullet journal examples at Instagram, and then I sat it at my table and thought, no, I won't do it. And then I had to jump over this hurdle as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned semi-structured journaling, so I guess there are more types than just this one. Can you explain those types you identified of journaling?
Yeah, so the semi-structured journal is one of the 3 types I would distinguish. So besides the semi-structured ones, like those pre-printed ones where you can search on the internet what fits you the most, I would, summarize stuff like bullet journaling with the term guided freestyle, because you have some sort of guidance. Like I mentioned, you have an index, you make page numbers, you have sort of bullets, you log daily or monthly or weekly. So some sort of structure, some sort of guidance, but it's also freestyle. You have a blank book and you can also maybe use 2 pages for a mind map or for whatever. So this is the second type, guided freestyle. And then the third type I would say is fully freestyle. So you have a blank book and you do whatever you please. So I know a couple of people who do, like, it's called morning pages. You get up in the morning, you get your book and your pen and you start writing until the flow of thoughts is stopped. So this would be the third type of having, I guess, some sort of structure or some sort what you're doing, but you don't have anything given there. Yeah.
Do you use multiple journals as one at once, or do you just have one journal? So you mentioned you started with a 6-minute diary, but you also mentioned you have a bullet journal. Do you have more journals at the same time while writing?
No, I don't have multiple journals at the same time when it comes to, like, for example, the 6 minutes diary. I finished that and then I switched to a bullet journal inspired approach. Then I got back to another semi-structured one. And I also allowed myself to say, oh, now I know another one, like a bullet journal approach fits me better. Let's stop in the middle of the book, put it aside for some months and switch to another one. It was one time a few years ago where I tried a 2-book approach, where I experimented to have one for my private stuff and one for my business stuff. Because I was thinking maybe this would solve some problems I figured in my journaling practice. I ran into other problems, so you have to figure it out. So now I'm back to the one book approach again. So I have some sort of symbols for me to mark what is work and what is for me, if it's necessary at all. Yeah,
it's not that easy to cut those things with a hard line between them. It's work goes together.
Yeah, and especially as journaling is something for you as a full human being, at least as I'm doing it. Where to draw the line, it's hard. So for me, it was a mental burden. It didn't have the outcome that I intended. So I switched back to one.
Do you prefer digital or analog journaling?
So for me personally, I'm preferring the analog version, but that's also because I'm also not into, like, tech gear stuff at all. But I know people, and I once tried it out for some freestyle journaling exercises to have a digital pen and, for example, a tablet and write there. So I know 2 or 3 colleagues who do that with a digital pen on a digital paper. And then they have, I don't know which app, and they have it all stored there. They can search and stuff like that. So you need to decide which tool you would like to take. The only thing is really doing it by hand, which I really would advise, because it's different using your hand and a pen and a paper than typing on a keyboard. Yeah.
Another question in this direction. Do you have any tips how to keep the habit of journaling? Because I know for myself that I break up very often. I once had the 6-minute journal. It didn't went very well. So the bullet journal is okay. I think I have the habit to write it, but do you have any tips how I can strengthen that a habit that I keep it and get the best out of it?
Yeah. So when it comes to the habit building, if I cannot keep a habit, I'm looking why I cannot keep it. So, and this is also what I would advise, that or everybody gets to know, why do I want to do the journaling? If I just would like to do it because it's fancy or somebody said it would help me and I don't believe in that, then it will get, and maybe it will stay hard. So back then, for example, when I started out with the book that I got as a gift, it was really like, okay, he thought that gift would please me. I really like to give it a try. I really like to, yes, try it for 3 to 4 weeks, and then it got easier. I would say if after 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, it is still hard, this is an indicator that maybe you don't have a proper why for you, and maybe then you change the type or you change the frequency, maybe just do it twice a week, maybe one retrospective for you at the end of the week, and maybe some kind of like looking into the week on when the next week starts could also be a good thing. So reducing the frequency and seeing what changes there could also be a good approach. Yeah.
Now I would like to switch the topic to your talk, because you have a very catchy title with it. It's Dare More, Fear Less. And I have to admit, I visited your talk yesterday, but we're streaming online, and I guess there are many people who didn't know the talk. Could you explain the meaning behind those abbreviations?
Yeah, sure. So first, the abbreviations or the acronyms are, they aren't coined by me. They are coined by a couple of researchers, which coined them, and I really like them because they are kind of catchy, and they are standing for different aspects of the concept of psychological flexibility. So that might sound a little bit bulky, that word. So psychological flexibility is a capability, a mental capability of us humans we would like to strengthen. And when we strengthen that, so when we like train this mental muscle, then we get outcomes that are usually helpful for us human beings. So we are, for example, open, and we can accept and let go stuff. So we don't stick to old stories, for example. Then we are also pretty often fully present. So for example, when we are now talking, or when I'm talking with a colleague and I'm mentally somewhere else, then it's not so good for our interaction. So being present is also an outcome of psychological flexibility. And also the third thing, which is really important, is doing what matters. So just being present and letting go is nice, but also doing what matters in business and in life is also important. And this is why we would like to strengthen our psychological flexibility. And the D.A.R.E and the F.E.A.R are now, certain, you could say, factors. D.A.R.E are the factors which pay into growing your psychological flexibility. And I'm wondering, should I explain what they are standing for? Is that
yes,
helpful?
Of course.
Yeah. So the daring is consisting of D stands for diffusion, A stands for acceptance, and the R stands for reconnection with our own values, and the E stands for engaging in action. So if we just look at the R and the E, these are the values thing, knowing your values, and also then acting according to them. These go together, and usually they are easily to grasp for us, I would say, or easier than the D and the A. So diffusion and acceptance sound maybe a bit soft, touchy-feely, like acceptance. This is something, for example, you can also practice with journaling, but you can also imagine like mindfulness exercises. So then you practice your acceptance skills. And diffusion is, for me, or I would say without a psychological background, the hardest to explain. You could imagine like sometimes we have thoughts that are not that helpful. And diffusion means like diffusing your mental bombs. So questioning in a healthy way what your mind produces, for example. And journaling techniques can also help there. With the R and the E, journaling is really helpful because this is more like brain stuff we are used to as software developers, architects, and I would say brain workers. So these are the things that there why we would like to journal. And the F.E.A.R acronym is also connected to psychological flexibility. These are explaining, like, I would say, properties of our brain. So I often say they are describing the mental boxes we are often locking ourselves in. So we are limiting ourselves, and this is very human. So the F stands for we are fused with our thoughts usually. So we as human beings often take our thoughts for truth. So if I'm thinking the person over there is a bad guy, I'm sometimes thinking this is truth, but maybe not. Maybe he just did something that I found stupid, for example. So questioning my thoughts. And the E stands for we evaluate our experiences. So if somebody does something to me, I'm quickly putting a label onto that. And this is also very human. We need that, and often it is helpful. Sometimes it's not. The A stands for avoiding experiences. So let's say I have that colleague where I'm finding we have a conflict. Maybe I'm avoiding having that clarification talk and saying, well, you know, you did something stupid, for example. So this is hard. And the R stands for reason giving of behavior. So we humans are also very great at making stories about the past. So why we did act, why we did not act, why we did avoid. So, and this is all very human, this F.E.A.R acronym. It helps our brain to, I would say, not explode. And the thing is, why is it important? The fearless, knowing about what F.E.A.R stands for, knowing about our limitations is the first step of breaking those boxes. So if I know about that, I can more often train to not being fused with my thoughts, to question, is it really that way? Does this guy really look dangerous, or is he really stupid, or did he just do 2 stupid actions? And we can talk about that. And maybe he wasn't aware and he can change, for example. Same with me. So, yeah.
But how can journaling help us with the D.A.R.E more and feel less? Can you give some examples of maybe some detailed prompts, what I can personally do to diffuse stuff and to be more to perform D.A.R.E in my journal, so to say.
Yeah. So the easy approach is to aim for the R and the A. So for the last two letters of the D.A.R.E with the journaling, if you start out. So really, this is about what we talked, getting clear about the why, getting clear about your values, what you really value in your life and business. For example, for me, this is health, this is connections with friends and family, for example. This is also freedom and having those values clear. So this can be done in your journal, but also in another kind of work, which is usually written. And if you have that clear, you can incorporate your values in your journaling practice. For example, if you talk bullet journaling and you have a log and you plan, for example, your month or your week, you can take your tasks and either question yourself or write it down, cluster them according to your values. So the classic example is paying my taxes or paying an insurance. I really hate this paperwork, but I'm doing that because, for example, I value my freedom. I don't like people coming and sending letters, you have to pay something or stuff like that. This is an easy example, but you know, when you include values in your journaling practice, you get to really do more what matters. So this is one thing, and it's also inherent if you really do it manually, preferably the analog version. This adds some sort of friction, so you cannot copy and paste and stuff. So you are really in the present moment. Sometimes it's tedious, like I'm doing bullet journaling, I'm doing like page numbering, and I'm copying some tasks from one page to the other. But this really also adds this moment of thinking, do I really want to do that? Do I really need to do that? Maybe I do it now and then I don't need to copy it by hand the third time. So this is where journaling very simply helps us to grow our D.A.R.E things. The D and the A is a little bit harder to explain in a couple of minutes. Usually you have sort of exercises. For example, I have a practice of sitting in the morning 5 minutes and concentrating on my breath. So this is a mindful practice, and it's really still hard for me. Sometimes I'm like, I know this is healthy for me, but I hate it, but I'm doing it anyway. And afterwards, when I'm journaling, I can then reflect onto what happened, what maybe changed. And so you can include that also in the journaling practice. Yeah.
How can I identify my values? Because I think when I'm thinking freely about what could my values be, I'm pretty lost, I guess. Are there any guidelines or something where I can check, oh yes, health is very interesting for me, but maybe other stuff not?
Yeah, so I would say there are a lot of exercises out there. I struggled once as well when I tried to find an exercise that suits me. I found a diary which is called ACT diary. So this stands for this acceptance and commitment therapy or training, where psychological flexibility is also incorporated. And it's written by a psychologist. I think he wrote it for teachers inherently, but it has a lot of exercises, and one exercise that suited me very well, and you could take any list of values, for example, you find on the internet. Yesterday in my talk, I showed a slide of usually it's 20 or 30 values. So any set of values, for example, you can find. Or I also have on my webpage with the publications on the very bottom end, I have 2 references where there are links included to such value lists. And what I'm then doing is, or what the exercise suggests, just print out this 30 values list and then start crossing it out. Like, okay, this doesn't suit, or this doesn't suit either that way, or start circling. Okay, this sounds appealing, and then maybe you boil it down to 15 values. Okay, then take your 15 values, put it on the next sheet of paper, and then, try to condense it for the aim, for example, to have 3 values is really, really strict, but maybe 7, and then go with them and see what happens. So this is not carved in stone. So if you feel over half a year, maybe this is not the thing what is really important to you, then you go and revise it and change it. But you can start with those then. Yeah.
I will try it on the weekend.
Yeah.
So you talked much about journaling and about D.A.R.E and F.E.A.R. Now I'm interested in what does journaling offer from a job's point of view. So I understand it's very much for me, for my self-reflection and my understanding, and to be more open, I guess, more acceptant. But why does this help me in the job?
Yeah, let's think, or let's imagine a drop falling onto like a lake or a huge water amount, and there's this ripple effect. So the first thing we have to have in our mind, if 1 or 2 or a couple of people in a team or in an organization start work on themselves, start changing themselves, start leadership work with themselves, this has an effect in the system. You might not see it, you might also not be aware of it, but it has an effect. So this is the first thing. If it's getting more popular at work, if it's not, oh, a diary, this is for small children, then we have made one real big step, so that people are starting to reflect themselves at work and also beyond. The second thing is, if you're really looking more to more tangible business things, then it's about learning. So usually in our jobs, it's all about learning. We need to learn new stuff. We need to learn new methods. We need to learn about business context of our clients, for example. And this is also something where writing down can help and can help reflect, because it's not just, running through our days and cramming stuff in our heads, It's also taking some time, and even if it's just 5 minutes, and reflecting on what we experienced. And there the real learning takes place, and considering, maybe this step, what I did today, could be made a little bit better. And this just happens if you take those 5 minutes for you and reflect, for example, in the evening of your workday. So this also might sound very, very simple, I would say, but this really makes the difference if people start practicing that. And also encouraging themselves, or for example, we have usually like kind of communities of practice at work for different aspects of our software craft. And why not having a community of practice for journaling, for example? You don't need to share your journal, but exchange, what do you do? Oh, it's getting hard for me. What do you do? Or maybe just sharing that it's getting hard, stuff like that. Yeah.
So you said 5 minutes in the evening. Do you take a journal with you every time, and or do you have time boxes where you journal? So in the morning 5 minutes, in the evening 5 minutes, or is it more like you take your journal with you, and when at work something happens where you think, oh my gosh, I have to think about this again, I will do it right now, because now it's pretty present in my head when I have to write it down in 8 hours or more. Maybe I forgot the key points of it. Do you have time boxes to journal, or do you prefer journaling when it's on your mind right in the moment?
Yeah, so speaking about having it with me at work, so in pre-corona times, I really had my bullet journal with me. So always like water bottle and the book, because honestly, I always had some sort of stuff to write when I was around. So that, yeah, it's just, it's a habit to have some sort of writing with you. Now in remote work times, okay, I have it at my table, so it's getting easier. And I'm also doing it throughout the day, because I really feel it gets easier if it gets from the top of my head to the paper. I know I wrote it down. I can forget about it now. I have it there. This is the first thing. So if there's something coming up, which would then spin around in my head until I can note it down, I just note it down. The other thing is, yes, I have a regular practice. So I'm sitting down with my coffee in the morning and writing a little bit. And I'm also sitting down in the evening when I'm switching off my devices before I go to bed and writing a little bit. So this is really the usual practice. And meanwhile, I'm doing it really daily. But there are also times when it feels hard, and then I don't push myself. Then it's more an indicator like, okay, I don't want to do it. Okay, let's observe that. And let's maybe have some days. And then on the weekend, when I have more free time, sit down and see maybe it needs a change in my practice. Usually this is an indicator then. Yeah.
Will you only write the stuff down, or will you go through it and read it again when it's a week or month ago?
That really depends. So when I feel it gets hard, and I know the practice helps me, but when it gets hard, I know meanwhile, because of the experience, I need a change. So then I'm taking like the next free space a couple of days ago in the future, like usually on the weekends, sitting down for an hour and reflecting. And then is also when I'm looking back usually and trying to see if I see a pattern. When I'm also looking back is when I have a bad day, and I think, for example, I don't get anything done or stuff like that, then I look back and look for my, for example, indicators of what I can be grateful for or what I did achieve the last weeks, and see that and use that as kind of brain fuel. And what also helps there, I have a couple of like markers usually in my thing, no, not just a pen. And so it's pretty easy to like, just go back and see, oh, the green hearts, this is what I need now, for example. Yeah.
Cool. So time flies by, but I want you to ask if you only could give one hint to the audience about how to start journaling, what would this hint be?
So how to start? So the hint would be, usually you have some sort of paper at home. So be it printer paper or other paper, and the hint would really be like, take some paper, so like 2 or 3 pages, and fold them in the middle. I also do that with workshop people, and then start today or latest tomorrow. You don't need to have a book or something fancy and then start, and maybe start with writing down 3 things of today, what you're grateful for. do it for a week and see what happens. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Cosima. It was very, very exciting to talk to you, and I'm very happily looking forward to the weekend because I will try some of your tips out. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you all for listening and watching this video. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.